What if I told you some spirits never left their graves, and tonight they might be watching you? If you love ghost stories, hit subscribe, tap like, and share this video so we can bring you even more terrifying tales. Subscribe, like, share to keep the ghosts coming.
There are nights when the sky seems too large for human ambition, nights when the blackness above is not an expanse but a gulf, and the stars are not companions but cold witnesses. On March 8, 2014, Malaysia Airlines Flight MH370 lifted into that gulf, a silver bird trembling with light, carrying 239 lives who believed they were embarking on the most ordinary of journeys. Families, business travelers, students, children. Their bodies strapped into seats, their spirits lulled by the hum of turbines. The Boeing 777 was a marvel of engineering, a machine designed to tame distance, to conquer the horizon. And yet within less than an hour, it would slip from the world of maps and measurements into the eternal catalog of mysteries. This is not merely the story of an accident, or even of a disappearance. It is the anatomy of a haunting. For in the years that followed, MH370 did not simply vanish, it transformed. It became a myth, a ghost, a shadow that draped itself over the global imagination. Its passengers became phantoms, their absence more terrifying than any presence. And the plane itself, once a vessel of comfort, became a wandering soul, the Flying Dutchman of the skies. But to understand the haunting, one must first understand the world it left. The landscape of 2014 was a stage of contradictions. Satellites mapped every inch of Earth, and yet human beings were still capable of vanishing utterly. Air traffic control, radar, GPS, black boxes. The architecture of certainty seemed impregnable. We were lulled into believing that technology was stronger than fate. And so when MH370 slipped beyond the reach of every instrument, it struck not only as a human tragedy, but as an existential rupture. The night began like countless others. At 12:41 a.m., the plane rose from Kuala Lumpur International Airport, engines roaring into darkness. The captain, Zahari Ahmad Shah, seasoned and steady, spoke with calm professionalism. His first officer, young and ambitious, monitored instruments. Passengers adjusted their blankets, ordered tea, or leaned their heads against cool glass to watch the city's lights retreat. In Beijing, families waited for their arrival, some already asleep, dreaming of morning reunions. But the ocean was waiting, and the night was listening. At 1:19 a.m., as the aircraft crossed from Malaysian airspace toward Vietnamese control, Zahari's voice was heard one final time. "Good night, Malaysian 370, a phrase mundane in aviation, ritualistic in its repetition, yet in retrospect it carries the weight of a final prayer. For minutes later, the plane ceased all transponder communication, silenced its identifying beacon, and seemed to dissolve from the digital lattice of surveillance. One moment a blip, the next, an absence. Absence is the cradle of ghosts. The radar watched in confusion as the plane veered off course, turning westward, carving a path not toward Beijing, but toward mystery. Military radars recorded its ghostly flight, a zigzagging journey over the Malay Peninsula and out toward the vast mouth of the Indian Ocean. But soon, even those traces evaporated, leaving only questions, silence, and the yawning abyss of possibility. The world awoke to news of a missing plane, and at first the tone was one of certainty. Search parties would find it, satellites would pinpoint it, technology would not fail. But as days bled into weeks and weeks into months, the silence grew heavier. Debris washed up like bones from a drowned leviathan, but the body itself never surfaced. In its absence, speculation became ritual. Conspiracies flourished like fungi in the dark. Families clung to hope until hope became unbearable. And in the corners of the world where folklore breathes, whispers began. The plane did not crash. The plane did not die. The plane is still flying. For what is a ghost but something caught between states, between living and dead, between presence and absence? MH370 was too large to vanish, too modern to be lost, and so it became something else. It became spectral. In Malaysia, where old beliefs linger in the shadow of skyscrapers, the disappearance was not merely an aviation mystery. It was a rupture in the spiritual fabric. Fishermen whispered of strange lights moving beneath their boats, lights too orderly to be fish or tide. Farmers woke to dreams of planes circling endlessly above their fields, shadows passing over the moon but never touching the ground. Radio operators heard phantom static, fragments of cockpit announcements that could not exist. "We are experiencing," the voice would begin, only to dissolve into static hiss. The haunting had begun. But before we drown in its supernatural gravity, we must linger with the living. The families of the lost gathered in hotels, clutching photographs and cell phones, waiting for news that never came. A mother in China dialed her son's number each night, sometimes hearing the ringtone echo into emptiness. Engineers, analysts, governments all collided in frantic search. But there is something cruel about hope. It extends the wound. Each passing day carved absence into permanence, and as absence calcified, imagination filled the void. Stories grew. Some spoke of hijackers and secret bases. Others of government cover-ups, espionage, and conspiracies that twisted like smoke. But there was another undercurrent, more primal, more ancient, that the plane had crossed into another realm, that the ocean had swallowed not just its body, but its very essence, consigning it to the catalog of restless spirits. Consider the Indian Ocean, that vast and indifferent graveyard. Its depths are not merely water but pressure, silence, and darkness so total it borders on the metaphysical. To sink into it is to vanish into another world. When the plane entered its mouth, some say it was not destroyed but transformed, carried into a liminal place where machines and men alike become shadows. And so, the narrative unfolds like a ritual. Departure, silence, vanishing, haunting. This is how ghost stories are born. Not from superstition alone, but from the collision of loss and uncertainty, grief and imagination. In this story, MH370 is not just a machine. It is a vessel of souls, a cathedral of absence, a wandering entity that still haunts our skies. To speak of it is to summon the echo of engines, to feel the phantom turbulence ripple through the air. It is not bound to wreckage or debris. It is bound to memory, to myth, to that liminal territory where fact erodes into folklore. And like all great hauntings, it has stages. First, the disappearance, the moment of rupture. Then the haunting, whispers, visions, signs. Then the climax, the confrontation with the supernatural. And finally the ending, not closure but the open wound that keeps the ghost alive. This is the structure of our tale. This is the journey we will follow. MH370, the ghost flight, the wandering phantom of the modern world. A story as much about absence as about presence, as much about the living as about the dead. The night it vanished, the stars looked down impassively, the ocean rolled without care, and humanity confronted its own smallness. The plane is gone, but the story remains. The story grows, and in the story the haunting begins. It is one thing for a plane to disappear, and another for its absence to linger in the world like a shadow that never lifts. As days blurred into weeks after MH370's vanishing, the weight of the missing grew unbearable. Grief is a form of haunting in itself, but when the grief has no body to cling to, no wreckage to touch, it becomes porous. Spirits seep through the cracks. The families began to report strange phenomena. It started small. Dreams, flickers, uncanny coincidences. A woman in Beijing dreamt her husband stood outside the hotel where families gathered, his shirt still smelling of jet fuel, his eyes red-rimmed from lack of sleep. She reached for him and he said only one phrase, "We are still in the air." She woke screaming. A week later, another wife across the sea in Kuala Lumpur told journalists the same thing. Her missing husband had appeared to her in a dream, repeating those same words, syllable for syllable. Such synchronicities spread like wildfire. Some dismissed them as grief's tricks. Others whispered that the passengers were reaching out, trapped in an in-between sky where time does not move forward. Phones rang. Numbers disconnected months earlier suddenly gave a single ring before collapsing into silence. Emails appeared in spam folders, dated March 9th, sent from accounts that had been dormant since the night of the flight. The text was always corrupted, symbols and gibberish, but occasionally words emerged. Cold, dark, home. Engineers tried to explain it away as server lag, misrouted packets, glitches, but the families clung to them like prayer beads, decoding each fragment as if it were scripture. The haunting was not confined to technology. At sea, fishermen in the Straits of Malacca reported seeing a massive silhouette hovering beneath their boats in the moonlight. Not a whale, not a submarine, one old man said. It glowed from beneath, like a lantern made of iron. Some claimed to hear voices in the surf, not in Malay or Mandarin, but a polyglot chorus of pleas and prayers, impossible to place yet undeniable. The ocean itself seemed restless. On certain nights, waves carried whispers, static-laced like radio frequencies, and those who stood on the shore swore they heard announcements. Fasten your seatbelts, "We are experiencing turbulence." The voices were muffled, warped by distance, but they carried the cadence of the cabin. When search crews swept across the Indian Ocean, some sonar operators reported phantom echoes. Machines recorded returns that suggested an immense metallic body, only for the shapes to vanish as the ships drew closer. More than once, sonar images displayed a fuselage-like shadow, complete with wings. Crews descended into excitement, preparing for recovery, only to find nothing when they reached the coordinates. It was as if the plane dissolved at the touch of human approach, like a ghost that flickers out when confronted by light. Spiritualists, mediums, and shamans stepped forward, some with sincerity, others with opportunism. They gathered in hotels and homes, burning incense, chanting sutras, performing rituals to call the plane home. One Bomo in Malaysia staged a ritual at the airport itself, waving coconuts and bamboo as he chanted. Officials dismissed it as farce, but the crowd that gathered did not laugh. Desperation makes believers of us all. In villages near the coast, elders claim to have seen a new star appear in the night sky around the time of the disappearance. "It is not a star," they said, "but a lantern carried by the lost. They are trying to find their way back." Astronomers dismissed it as Venus, yet the tale spread, and for many nights people left offerings of rice and fruit outside, hoping the lost would find sustenance on their journey. Air traffic controllers in other parts of Asia began reporting anomalies. Radar screens flickered, showing a plane marked MH370 for brief seconds before vanishing again. Some wrote it off as software quirks. Others refused to speak publicly, fearing ridicule. But among themselves they whispered, the plane was still out there, but not in a way technology could hold. Ghost stories do not survive on facts. They survive on echoes, and MH370's echoes were multiplying. For pilots, the haunting was most terrifying. On long-haul night flights over the Indian Ocean, some crews reported hearing voices through the radio. Faint, overlapping, like cabin announcements transmitted from another layer of existence. The voices were distorted, but always they carried the tone of routine. Safety instructions, turbulence alerts, flight numbers. It was like listening to a flight still in progress, one pilot admitted anonymously. But there was no plane on our radar. On one occasion, a cargo pilot swore he saw a silver fuselage glide silently beneath him, lights glowing faintly, though no aircraft was scheduled in that corridor. He turned his spotlight down, but the craft dissolved into darkness. His co-pilot refused to discuss it ever again. It was in these sightings, these whispers, that MH370 began its true transformation, from missing aircraft to spectral entity. It was no longer a tragedy of flesh and steel. It was becoming legend, joining the company of the Flying Dutchman, the phantom trains that whistle along abandoned tracks, the ghostly armies still marching across Gettysburg fields. Only this time, the phantom was not tethered to land or sea. It was tethered to the skies. The haunting seeped into culture. Songs were written with lyrics about the plane that flies in circles. Films hinted at portals, parallel universes. Children drew pictures of planes surrounded by halos of light. In villages, parents threatened misbehaving children with warnings. If you don't listen, 70 will come and take you away in the night. Grief, folklore, and fear fused into something larger than fact. The families still gathered, still begged for closure, but the supernatural had become impossible to ignore. Too many dreams overlapped, too many voices spoke in unison, too many lights flickered where none should be. And in all of it, one motif returned again and again. The passengers were not gone. They were trapped. In the dreams, in the visions, they spoke of cold, of endless flight, of hunger, of longing for home. They spoke as if they were still strapped in their seats, eyes pressed to dark windows, turbulence rattling around them, waiting for a landing that never came. H370 was no longer a missing aircraft. It was a liminal world, a purgatory, a vessel that refused to release its souls. The passengers were its congregation, the plane their coffin, and the sky their crypt. And so, the haunting thickened. Every unanswered question, every fragment of debris, every unexplained radar blip, all of it fed the legend. All of it transformed tragedy into supernatural obsession. We who remain on the ground speak of closure, of evidence, of science. But those who listen carefully know that MH370 did not vanish. It became something else, something restless. It circles still, its engines humming in the void. A spectral craft bound by grief and silence, reminding us that the skies, for all our technology, are still a place where ghosts roam. And in that haunting, we are only in the middle act. The curtain has yet to rise on the climax. There comes a point in every haunting when whispers are no longer enough, when the ghost steps forward from the corner of the room into the open, undeniable, terrifyingly present. For MH370, that moment arrived not in a single flash of revelation, but in a slow crescendo, a layering of visions, reports, and shared nightmares, until the world began to realize that this was no longer an accident to be solved, but a haunting to be endured. It began with the pilots. Pilots, after all, live closest to the thin line between Earth and the void, between science and superstition. One night, months after the disappearance, a Singaporean cargo crew flying west over the Indian Ocean reported a strange turbulence. The weather was clear, no storm clouds in the vicinity, yet their instruments shook, dials jittered, and the plane's body vibrated with a hum like distant chanting. Then on the horizon they saw it, a row of cabin windows glowing faintly, as if lit by candles instead of electricity, a fuselage drifting parallel to them. The craft was featureless, blurred as though wrapped in mist. The co-pilot swore he saw faces pressed to the windows, pale, wide-eyed, unblinking. The apparition lasted no more than a minute before dissolving into the night. But when they landed, their cockpit recordings carried a second voice, layered beneath their own transmissions. It was faint, distorted, but the words were clear. Good night. Good night. Malaysian 370. This was the beginning of what aviators now call the Phantom Corridor, a stretch of sky above the Indian Ocean where compasses falter, radios catch whispers, and pilots report glimpses of a plane that should not exist. Some dismiss it as fatigue, tricks of the clouds. Others refuse to fly there at night. But in the lore of modern aviation, it is known. To cross the Phantom Corridor is to risk seeing the wandering ghost flight. Meanwhile, the family's dreams grew darker. At first, the passengers appeared to them tired, pleading, but still alive. By the second year, those dreams transformed. The passengers' eyes hollowed, their skin waxen, their lips whispering prayers. They clutched seatbelts with white knuckles, bodies trembling as though trapped in endless descent. Some spoke of fire, others of endless cold. A woman claimed her daughter appeared in her sleep every night, dressed still in the pajamas she'd worn on the flight, but her mouth was sewn shut with black thread. Another man swore his wife came to him, cradling their infant child, both pale as ash, repeating only, "We cannot land." Mediums capitalized, yes, but not all were charlatans. One Tibetan monk, known for his visions, entered trance before an audience of hundreds. His voice changed, becoming mechanical, clipped. "We are still in the air," he rasped, echoing the first dream accounts. "We are neither above nor below. The sky will not release us." When he woke, he had no memory of the event. Airports became pilgrimage sites. Families gathered in terminals long after hope was abandoned, carrying incense, chanting, leaving offerings at Gate C1 where the passengers last departed. Flight attendants whispered of seeing shadows in empty boarding gates, as though passengers were still queuing in silence. Cleaning staff swore they found damp footprints leading onto jet bridges hours after midnight, when no flights were scheduled. And then there were the recordings. In 2016, a radio enthusiast in Western Australia uploaded a file to the internet. A strange burst of shortwave static intercepted on a maritime band. Buried within the hiss was a voice, panicked, fractured, calling flight numbers, coordinates, emergency codes. But the final phrase froze listeners. 370, 370, descending, 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 before the signal cut off. Some claimed it was a hoax. Others analyzed it for weeks, noting the peculiar Doppler shifts that suggested the signal came from a moving airborne source over the ocean. It was never explained. The haunting reached its climax in collective consciousness one night, when villagers in Aceh, Indonesia, reported a sound in the sky unlike any thunder they had known. It was the roar of turbines, low and drawn out, circling overhead for hours, though no flight paths passed that way. Some claimed they saw faint streaks of light across the clouds, as if windows glowing in a submerged cathedral. Dogs howled, children screamed, elders prayed. By morning, fishermen found the sea unusually still, as if holding its breath. By now, MH370 was no longer just an absence. It was a presence. It lived not in the wreckage, but in the world's imagination, manifesting wherever grief and sky intersected. And like all great hauntings, it demanded a climax, a confrontation. That confrontation came for the search crews. In 2017, one vessel in the southern Indian Ocean recorded sonar returns so strong they celebrated prematurely. The data showed a fuselage intact, wings folded against the seabed. They prepared drones for descent. But when the machines entered the water, their cameras went black, all feeds drowned in static. For 30 minutes, the ship's systems froze, compasses spinning, lights dimming. Crew members later swore they heard a distant rumble beneath them, like engines revving, though no aircraft was above. When the systems returned, the sonar was blank. The fuselage was gone. The ocean showed only silt. It was as if the sea itself had conspired with the ghost, protecting its mystery. From then on, the haunting was undeniable. Even skeptics began to murmur. Scholars of folklore compared it to tales of the Orang Bunian, the hidden people of Malay myth who abduct humans into their invisible cities. Others likened it to Western maritime myths of ships swallowed whole into phantom fleets. Some theologians spoke of a collective purgatory, 239 souls suspended in limbo, their vessel transformed into a cathedral of endless sky. And in this climax, visions multiplied. Children on flights over the Indian Ocean told their parents they saw another plane flying alongside them, filled with people who waved with blank expressions. Passengers on red-eyes swore they heard footsteps pacing the aisles while everyone slept. One man claimed that during turbulence he looked out the window and saw another wing gliding parallel, so close he could see rivets gleaming. But when the turbulence ended, the wing vanished. The climax was not a single moment but a storm of moments, layered, overlapping, undeniable. MH370 was no longer gone. It was here, there, everywhere, looping endlessly in a sky we could not chart, forever trying to land yet never touching Earth. And perhaps most chilling of all were the voices. By the third year, radio enthusiasts across the world began capturing strange bursts of signal. Cockpit chatter, emergency codes, fragments of prayers, all distorted. Yet every file ended the same way, with silence broken by a whisper. We are still in the air. A haunting, once fully grown, becomes a part of reality. MH370 had transcended its absence, reaching that stage where ghost stories no longer require belief. They simply are. It became the sky's cathedral of shadows, a vessel of grief turned myth, a phantom that circles without rest. But a haunting never ends in climax alone. There is always aftermath, always the cold hush after the scream. And so the story of MH370 moves toward its final stage. The ending, not a closure, but an open wound that refuses to heal. Every haunting, no matter how vast, eventually settles into silence. Not because the ghost departs, but because the living learn to live with it. That is how legends are born, not through revelation but through endurance. The story of Malaysia Airlines Flight MH370 is no longer about search grids, radar plots, or wreckage. It is about the way absence itself became a living thing, an open wound the size of the sky. The official investigation sputtered into exhaustion. Reports were published, thick as tombstones, filled with charts, probabilities, and theories that never answered the essential question: where did they go? But outside the sterile corridors of governments, the haunting kept growing. Ordinary people began to speak of the flight the way sailors once spoke of cursed ships, or villagers of haunted forests. It slipped into language. In Southeast Asia, to say someone had taken the 370 became a euphemism for disappearing without explanation. In aviation circles, the phrase "phantom contact" was whispered whenever instruments reported something present and then gone. Even in casual conversation, the name carried a weight, like saying the word Titanic or Bermuda. It was no longer a flight number. It was a curse, and like all curses, it seeped into culture. Artists painted canvases of ghostly aircraft dissolving into clouds. Musicians composed requiems using distorted radio chatter. Writers, both serious and pulp, spun tales of the lost flight reappearing in stormy skies, its passengers ageless, eyes glowing with secrets. What had once been the domain of news anchors became folklore, a shared mythology for a planet that could no longer pretend it understood its own machines. But folklore is not harmless. Folklore has teeth. In 2018, a video surfaced online, uploaded from an unknown account, showing shaky footage taken through a commercial plane window. Against a night sky, another aircraft appeared, unlit, gliding without navigation lights, its silhouette unmistakable, a wide-body twin jet, silent, ghostly. In the cabin windows were faces, rows upon rows, staring outward. The video cut to static after 30 seconds. Authorities dismissed it as edited fakery, but thousands swore they recognized details of the livery, the faint outline of the Malaysian Airlines red and blue ribbon. Soon after, Airlines quietly updated their crew manuals. If phantom aircraft are sighted, do not attempt radio contact. Log the event, divert if possible, and do not acknowledge passenger reports. The sky itself had become an unspoken graveyard. And yet, despite the fear, there was a strange tenderness in the haunting. Families of the lost continued to dream of their loved ones. Some dreams softened. A daughter sitting at her father's bedside, smiling gently, mouthing words he could not hear. A husband watching his wife across a field of clouds, her hand raised in farewell. Others remained brutal, faces burned, lips sewn shut, endless screams. But across the spectrum, one theme persisted. They are still in motion. Not dead, not alive, something in between. This gave rise to what theologians began calling the doctrine of perpetual flight. A strange hybrid of religion and ghost story, it posited that MH370 had become trapped in a liminal state, a vessel transformed into purgatory itself. The aircraft no longer needed fuel or air. It flew on grief, on memory, on the refusal of its story to end. The souls aboard, caught between worlds, could not disembark. They were forever circling, suspended above oceans, waiting for a landing strip that reality would not provide. Believers of this doctrine began gathering annually on March 8th, the anniversary of the disappearance. They lit candles, faced the night sky, and whispered the flight number like a prayer. Some swore they heard turbine hums in the distance, faint but undeniable. Others claimed to see light streaking across clouds where no plane should be. For them, the haunting was not a curse but a communion, a reminder that love can tether souls even to impossible altitudes. Still, the darker side persisted. Fishermen along the Indian Ocean continued reporting strange sights. Life vests bobbing on calm seas, only to vanish when approached. Emergency slides unfurling from the waves, leading nowhere. Faint silhouettes of cabins glowing beneath the surface, as though the sea itself had swallowed a plane whole and was now replaying its memory. And in cities, more unnerving phenomena appeared. In Kuala Lumpur International Airport, security guards swore they heard boarding announcements at 2 a.m., calling passengers to Gate C1, the very gate MH370 departed from. The PA system, they claimed, would hum to life, repeat the flight number, then die again. Technicians insisted it was impossible, but the recordings, captured on cell phones, still circulate online, a mechanical voice echoing from nowhere. Malaysia Airlines Flight 370 now boarding. This is how MH370 entered ghost story canon. Not with proof, but with persistence. Ghosts, after all, are not about evidence. They are about the refusal to vanish. And in this, MH370 became perfect. No wreckage sufficient, no final confirmation, no bodies returned to Earth. Only fragments, echoes, dreams, and the endless repetition of its absence. The greatest hauntings are not in castles or graveyards, but in places we cannot touch. The sea, the sky, the silence between worlds. MH370 is now one of them. Like the Flying Dutchman, it circles endlessly, a myth made flesh, a wound disguised as a story. And perhaps that is the truest terror. Not that we lost the plane, but that we created a ghost vast enough to haunt the whole planet. A ghost not tied to a house or a single village, but to every runway, every takeoff, every moment you hear the cabin doors seal and wonder, what if this time we vanish too? For the haunting of MH370 is not only theirs, it is ours. It reminds us of how fragile the line is between earth and sky, how thin the walls are between knowing and never knowing. It whispers that the world is larger, stranger, more merciless than we allow ourselves to believe, and so, even now as planes cross the Indian Ocean, as passengers sip their drinks and watch movies, there are moments when turbulence rattles the cabin and a thought slips into the mind. What if, just beyond that cloud, there is another aircraft pacing us, silent, watching, a wide-bodied jet, its windows glowing faintly, its passengers pressed to the glass, whispering endlessly, "We are still in the air." Not a crash, not a conclusion, but a haunting without end.